can see why you picked that to talk about, but what's it got to do with singularity?
Okay. Well, personally, I think that there aren't enough people working on the major scientific breakthroughs that are behind what may cause a singularity. So, and I think the reason for that is that there are several reasons. One is that I don't think there's enough funding in science, but then I would say that because I'm a scientist. But I think that there are ways in which we can get the general public more attuned to the idea of a singularity by getting them involved in some of the basic scientific principles that might lead to it. And I think it's just I don't see how you can lose out really.
So we could be crowdsourcing some of the problems. Solutions. Yeah.
I'd love to crowdsource some of my neuroscience stuff, having people categorize or just.
Goes into well, going into this really, the similarity and differences between the singularity concept as defined within the field of predictions of how computation is going to evolve, and the work that I do on combating aging. So this is what we do. This is a US registered charity. We do have a UK counterpart. But the main thing that I am affiliated with is the US registered charity, and what we're interested in is defeating aging, and essentially the work that we focus on is built around the concepts that I've developed over the past 10 or so years, and that I'll be talking about over the next 10 or so minutes, which comes down to this: regenerative medicine solutions to the problems of aging, of age-related ill health. And so I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes describing why I favour that approach. And I'm going to start by describing what the nature of the problem is. Aging is a side effect of being alive in the first place. That's why it happens only when we've been alive for a while. And if we want to dissect that definition into something that might be useful for determining what would be appropriate, promising ways to combat aging, then I find that this is a very good way of doing that, a very good first step in doing that. We can say that there are a variety of immediate side effects of being alive, immediate side effects of metabolism, and when I say immediate, what I mean is things that happen throughout life, even starting before we're born, and that are laid down as what I'm going to call damage, and that accumulate, that are not repaired automatically by the body, and therefore they become more and more abundant throughout life, and eventually there comes a point where there's sufficient abundance of these things that they get in the way, that they essentially impede the ability of our metabolism to do what it normally does, namely to keep us structurally and functionally the same from one day to the next and from 1 year to the next. So that impairment of metabolism is what I'm just going to call pathology. Pathology essentially I'm using to embrace all of the things that constitute age-related decline in health and in functionality. And what that means, what that has historically been viewed as meaning in terms of our options for doing anything about aging is summed up here. Essentially, we've got metabolism causing damage and causing pathology. And we have these two themes that exist within the schools of thought that have gone on with regard to doing anything about aging. I'm just signifying them by these rather oversimplistic terms, gerontology and geriatrics. The geriatrics approach is to slow down. So these little flat-headed arrows, that's a notation taken from the genetics literature, and it just means inhibits. So the geriatrics approach is fundamentally to focus on old people, to focus on people in whom pathology is already beginning to emerge, and to try to slow down the progression of that pathology so that it takes longer for it to get to a seriously problematic and life-threatening level. And that's fair enough in principle, obviously, it is better than nothing. The gerontology approach essentially says, well, hang on, prevention is better than cure, and therefore what we should really be trying to do is cleaning up metabolism. In other words, slowing down the rate at which it actually creates damage in the first place. And obviously that will have the same effect. It will postpone the age at which pathology begins to emerge, and therefore, by extension, it will postpone the age at which pathology becomes problematic. Okay, so that's great so far. The problem with the geriatrics approach is summed up here, and you don't need to know any biology whatsoever to understand this slide. Aging is very miserable. Lots of bad things happen, it's very chaotic, all of these things happen, they happen at an accelerating rate, they exacerbate each other, it's all really rather horrible, and the worst part is the fact that we're intervening too late in the game, the fact that we're intervening in something whose precursor is accumulating. So I've defined damage, you'll recall, as the ongoing lifelong accumulation of various molecular and cellular problems. And by definition, the geriatrics approach intervenes in something, therefore, that is becoming harder to intervene in as time goes on. So the geriatric approach is better than nothing, no question about that, but it's not much better than nothing, and it never will be, because the geriatrician's problem is getting progressively harder as the subject becomes older. Unfortunately, the gerontology approach is also completely fucked because of this. The fact is that metabolism is rather complicated. This is a simplified diagram of a small subset of what we know about how metabolism works, about how the body really keeps going from one day to the next. And that's bad enough. But what's really bad is that this is a simplified diagram of a small subset of what we know about how metabolism works, which is completely dwarfed, as any biologist will tell you, by the totally astronomical amount that we don't know about how metabolism works, even completely ignoring all the even more astronomical amount that we don't even know that we don't know. So basically, it's completely hopeless. I mean, there's no way in the world that we could possibly intervene in a process like this in a manner that did anything at all without doing more harm than good. 90% of the time, if we try to actually mess about with this and try to, in some way, slow down the rate at which metabolism creates damage, then metabolism will just laugh in our face and do what it was doing anyway. This is the typical thing that's been found, for example, with antioxidants. When you feed an animal some antioxidants, it says, well, I'd actually like my free radicals, please, because I'm using them for other reasons, and it'll actually down-regulate its own antioxidant machinery to compensate. So it's basically hopeless. There's no way in the world, for the foreseeable future, that we're going to be able to make appreciable impact, in my view anyway, on the rate at which metabolism creates damage over and above what the body already knows how to do. So what's the answer? Well, obviously I wouldn't be such an outrageously optimistic person in respect of combating aging if that were the end of my story. So it's very useful, I think, to recognise the fact that the body is a machine. The human body is a very, very complicated machine, but still a machine. Therefore, it's possible, in fact I would say quite likely, that we could get some good ideas for how to extend the functional lifespan of this machine beyond its, what you might call its warranty period, by looking at how we already succeed in extending the functioning lifespan of simple man-made machines beyond their warranty period. So here the car, whose warranty period is unusually long for its type of machine. In other words, this is a car that's more than 50 years old, and it was built to last that long. Most cars probably last about 10 or 15 years before you jump on and get a new one. This one lasted a lot longer because it was built that way. It's got that corrosion-resistant metal and thick tires and all that. The point about this slide is the title. Because, of course, the human body is already built to last longer than your average living organism, longer than dogs and mice and so on. The question is, how can we do better? And the reason I've used VW bugs up here, VW beetles, is because, of course, there are just as many 50-year-old VW beetles driving around the streets of the UK and Europe and so on, as there are 50-year-old Land Rovers. And the reason there are so many, is not because they were built to last. It's because they've got something else, namely style, which has caused their owners to fall in love with them and to do an exceptional amount of maintenance on them. And the existence of cars like this, this car was built in the same year as the one on the previous slide, is an existence proof. It's a proof that maintenance works, just so long as it's comprehensive enough. Clearly, everyone does maintenance on their cars. They have to take them in every year for the MOT and all that, but not sufficiently comprehensive to actually extend their functioning lifespan significantly beyond their warranty period. Whereas, if you do a bit more, then you can get a car to last pretty much indefinitely. And that is a rather useful concept to take back to the question of human aging, because what it motivates is the understanding that there's a third completely different approach, which I'm going to call the maintenance approach. You could call it the engineering approach. Essentially what we're saying here is, rather than trying to intervene in this process whereby damage causes pathology, or indeed this process whereby metabolism causes damage, we intervene at an intermediate point. We actually intervene to address the damage itself. And the reason I'm so optimistic about this approach is because it sidesteps, avoids the shortcomings of the other two approaches. And that's easy to see. So in the case of comparing it with the geriatric approach, what we're doing is we're intervening early enough that we're not subject to this vicious cycle, this downward spiral of accumulating damage making the problem get progressively harder. Because what we're doing here is repairing damage periodically as and when it's laid down. And damage, by definition, does not have any accumulating precursors. Damage is the set of things that are the immediate byproducts, side effects of metabolism, but in later life. So this is really why I think that the maintenance approach is so promising. This is the first reason, anyway. It's because it avoids the big shortcomings of the other two approaches. Now, of course, so far all I've done is describe the concept of damage and and the maintenance approach very much in the abstract, without talking about biology at all. But I'm a biologist, I'm interested in actually implementing all of this. And this is more